He was just the janitor, mop in hand, head down, invisible to the uniformed giants around him. Until one day, a military combat expert called him out in front of everyone. They thought it was just a joke. But what happened next? No one laughed. No one moved. Because when he stepped forward, the entire base stood still. Call to action. Now, let's begin. Hey, mop boy. Think you could teach my cadets how to dodge? Staines, the voice sliced through the echoing gym like a blade, drawing laughter from the row of young soldiers lined up along the mat. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, washing the training center in a hard white glow. Lieutenant Mason Briggs stood at the center of the room, arms crossed, his combat boots planted like roots, the smirk on his face sharp enough to cut through metal. At the far end of the gym, Jack Rourke kept his gaze low. He dipped the mop into the bucket, wrung it out, and moved silently across the floor, each stroke steady, precise, like muscle memory from a life no one here knew he had. Briggs took a step forward, voice louder now. Come on, man. I bet you've never even thrown a punch. Unless it was at a ketchup bottle in the mess hall. More chuckles, nervous ones, the kind people let out when they're not sure which side they should be on. Jack said nothing. He focused on a scuff mark near the wall, one that had been there for 3 days. Probably a boot drag from someone trying to make an impression on their first day. Across the room, Private Lucy Carter narrowed her eyes. She'd seen Jack before. Quiet, always around, never in the way. Just the janitor. But something about the way he moved tonight. Something about the way he didn't flinch. Lieutenant, she said softly, maybe we should keep training. It's late. Briggs didn't even look at her. You worried about your boyfriend's feelings harder. She blushed, looked away. The others chuckled again, but more uneasily now. Briggs kept his eyes on Jack. What's the matter? Janitor floor got more fight than you do. Jack paused, slowly straightened up. He looked toward Briggs, not with anger, but with a kind of unsettling calm. I'm just here to clean, he said, voice even low. You do your job. I'll do mine. Briggs grinned. Is that what you call it? Cleaning? Because all I see is a man pretending not to exist. Something in the room shifted. The laughter stopped. Jack's grip tightened on the mop handle, but just slightly. Enough for Lucy to notice. She stepped forward. Sir, this isn't right. Briggs turned toward her, his tone flat now. You want to question me? Private Lucy hesitated. No, sir. I just think... Good. Then shut up and learn something. He turned back to Jack. Actually, you know one. Maybe you can help. We're working on defensive reaction drills. Thought it might be fun to demonstrate what happens when a man with 0 training walks onto a mat. Jack turned back to his bucket unmoved, not interested. Briggs took a few slow steps forward, his boots thudding across the mat. I think you are. He stopped just short of Jack. In fact, he said, voice dropping, I think you've been watching us for weeks, wishing you had a place on this mat. Am I right? Jack looked up, finally. There was a flicker, just a flicker of something behind his eyes. Not anger, not fear. Wait. Then he said, calm as a winter field. This mat, it used to mean something. Briggs raised an eyebrow. Used to, Jack nodded. Back when men stood on it to learn, not to perform. A sharp inhale rippled through the room. Lucy looked between the two men. Briggs, standing tall, proud, mocking. Jack, quiet, weathered, unshakable. Briggs took one step closer. All right then, how about we learn something right now? And without warning, without permission. He reached out and pushed. Just a nudge, barely more than a tap. But Jack didn't move. Not an inch. His boot stayed rooted, his spine straight. It was like pushing a brick wall. Briggs blinked. Jack looked at him. Not confrontational. Just present. Careful, Lieutenant, he said softly. "You might slip on your own ego." The room held its breath. Lucy covered her mouth. A couple of cadets glanced at each other, uncertain whether to laugh or be impressed. Briggs's face flushed. "You think you're clever," he growled. Jack leaned on the mop handle, the faintest smile touching the corner of his mouth. "No," he said. "I think I'm tired." Briggs took another step and now chest to chest, tired of what Jack looked past him toward the line of watching soldiers. Some were no older than his daughter, all of them looking for something, an example, a leader, of watching boys confuse loudness with strength. For a long second Briggs didn't speak, then he stepped back, let out a short laugh, and clapped his hands once. "All right, show's over." Everyone hit the showers. But no one moved. Not yet. They were still watching Jack, still wondering why their hearts were beating just a little faster, still asking themselves one question: who is this man? And why did a push that light feel like the beginning of an earthquake? The storm didn't come all at once. It never did. It crept in quietly, settling first in the hallway outside the gym, then in the thin air inside the maintenance room, where Jack Rourke stood, washing his hands at a rusted sink, the soap barely lathering. His reflection stared back from the scratched mirror above the basin, creased face, steady eyes, tired hands. The echo of that shove still pulsed through his chest, not from pain, but from something far older. A memory awakening, a pulse in the bones, a door unlocking that he'd welded shut years ago. Behind him the door creaked open. Dad Jack looked up, caught Emma's voice before her reflection appeared behind his own. She stood in the doorway with a paper bag in one hand, a knit beanie pulled over her curls. There was something in her stance, half defensive, half hopeful, that reminded him of her mother. "I brought dinner," she said, lifting the bag slightly. "Didn't want you eating out of that vending machine again." He dried his hands and turned. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to." Emma walked in, setting the bag on the counter. The silence between them wasn't heavy, just familiar. The kind that fills the space between two people who've learned to live with what they haven't said. As Jack sat, Emma took the opposite chair. "He pushed you." Jack paused before unwrapping the sandwich. "Not the first time someone has." "Yeah, but this one was different. He did it in front of people, on purpose." She leaned forward, eyes sharp. "You didn't even flinch." He stared at the sandwich like it might answer for him. Emma waited, but when he said nothing, she pushed again, gently, but with steel underneath. "Dad, why do you let people treat you like that?" Jack finally met her eyes. There was pain in his silence, but not weakness. Something deeper, like grief that had been folded and worn so long it became part of his skin. "Because some men use power to feel big," he said, "and some men only look small when they use it." Emma tilted her head. "That's poetic, but it's not fair." Jack's gaze softened. "Fair doesn't keep you alive. Knowing when not to fight. Sometimes that does." She studied him. "Did you know him, Briggs? No, I mean, did you know someone like him back then?" Jack didn't answer right away. Then, with a breath, the room changed. "I knew a lot of men like him," he said quietly. "And one man who wasn't." Emma sat back, letting his voice take the space it needed. "We were deployed in Kandahar. I was a combat instructor, ran point on hand-to-hand for Black Ops units. There was a kid in my unit, real firecracker. Tony Rodriguez, fast, smart, mouthy. Reminded me of someone I didn't want to remember." "Yourself?" Emma asked. Jack smiled. "Just a flicker. Something like that." He leaned forward, hands clasped. "One night during rotation downtime, Tony and I sparred. It wasn't supposed to mean anything, just muscle memory. But there were comments from the sidelines about who was tougher, who looked more American, who didn't." Emma swallowed. "Racial slurs." He nodded once. "And I," His throat caught. I lost focus. I lost control. I threw harder than I should have. Tony didn't dodge in time. He hit the floor wrong, cracked his skull on the edge of a reinforced mat. He never woke up. Emma's hand flew to her mouth. Jack looked down. The official report called it an accident. But I knew better. My anger didn't come from the fight. It came from not standing up when it mattered, from letting the wrong voices get inside my head. I swore I'd never step onto a mat again. Emma whispered. You walked away. I buried everything I was. Changed my name. Moved states. Found a job where no one asks questions, where no one expects strength. He looked up. But today, something cracked. That kid, Briggs, he poked at the right scar. Emma was quiet for a moment, then softly, Is that why Mom always said you were protecting us from yourself? Jack turned away. That hurt more than any shove. She was right, he said. And wrong. There was a long pause. Then Emma reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded newspaper clipping. She laid it on the table gently. I found this in an old box of hers last year. I didn't know who Ghost Wolf was, until tonight. The photo was faded, but unmistakable. A younger Jack, lean, lethal, unshaven, stood between two Delta Force soldiers, bruised but smiling after a sparring exhibition. His eyes were different, wilder, sharper, sadder. Jack stared at it like he was looking at a ghost. Why didn't you show me this before, he asked. Because I was waiting for the man in the photo to come home. Her voice didn't tremble, but Jack's heart did. Outside, the wind pressed against the building, whistling through the old seams. It felt colder now, or maybe just real. You think he still exists? Jack asked. I think Emma said, rising to her feet, he never left. He just forgot how to stand. She grabbed her coat, then turned back to him. Dad, you may have left the mat, but the mat never left you. And then she was gone, leaving Jack alone in the room, with nothing but a memory, a mop and a mirror that finally showed the face he'd tried to forget. A man who once taught soldiers how to fight, and was now being asked by his own daughter to remember how to stand. Morning arrived wrapped in fog, the kind that made Fort Ridgeline look less like a base and more like a memory. The asphalt was damp. The flag flapped listlessly on its pole. Somewhere in the distance a whistle blew. But inside the gym the air felt heavier than weather. It felt like something waiting to break. Jack Rourke pushed open the side maintenance door with his shoulder mop handle slung across his back like an old rifle. He was earlier than usual, and that wasn't lost on the soldiers already gathering. Private Lucy Carter noticed first. He moved differently today. Not faster or slower, just heavier. Like a man carrying something invisible but sharp. She turned to her friend, Private Singh. You see him? Singh glanced up. The janitor. Yeah, he's here before everyone. He's not just the janitor, she murmured. Not anymore. Across the room, Lieutenant Mason Briggs paced the center of the mat like it belonged to him. And for most of his career, it had. But something about yesterday's moment, the shove that didn't land, the silence that followed stuck to him like a burr under the skin. He had laughed it off last night, told the boys it was a fluke, that the janitor probably didn't even realize how lucky he got. But luck doesn't make you feel like you hit concrete. Briggs glanced toward the janitor now, who was setting up the corner mats. Calm, quiet, detached. That calm infuriated him more than any insult could have. He barked toward the group. Everyone pair up. Defensive drills, counter pivots and arm traps. And someone get me Carter. Lucy stepped forward. Sir, he pointed to the center. You're with me. There were murmurs, half anticipation, half anxiety. Briggs didn't usually spar with the lower ranks, let alone a young woman. But Lucy had proven herself technically sharp. Still, this felt different. She stepped into position. Briggs adjusted his stance, then lowered his voice. "You've been watching him." Lucy blinked. "Sir, you know who I mean." She said nothing. "Don't fall for the mystique. You watch too long from the shadows, and you'll start confusing dust for glory." She met his eyes. "Is that what you see in him, dust?" He smirked. "I see a man who didn't make it. A man who hides behind a mop because the mat didn't want him anymore." Lucy's jaw clenched, but she held the stance. Briggs came at her quickly, too quickly. She dodged the first move, countered the second, but the third landed a light sweep to her legs that sent her to one knee. He extended a hand to help her up. She took it, then said quietly, "Maybe he's not the one hiding." Briggs froze. His hand lingered in hers for half a beat too long. Then he pulled away, turned sharply, and barked, "Everyone reset." 10 push-ups now. Across the room Jack had been watching, not obviously, not openly, but watching. He returned to the storage room but left the door cracked just an inch. He could still hear it, the same tones, the same patterns. He'd heard it 100 times in the field. The way some men dressed dominance as discipline, the way they tested the boundaries of others under the banner of respect. He had once been one of them, until Tony Rodriguez, until the funeral with no salutes, until a daughter who cried in her sleep. Jack sat down on the crate marked "Floor Wax." Military grade ran a hand through his hair and whispered to no one, "There are lines you don't cross." He didn't mean the push, he meant the silence that followed it. Because silence in the wrong hands isn't peace, it's complicity. Just then the storage door opened. Lucy stood there. She hesitated before stepping in. "Sorry, I saw you walk in." Jack gave a small nod. "You don't have to apologize for looking." She stepped closer, arms crossed. "Why don't you do something about what? You know what?" Her voice was low and tense. "Briggs, the taunting, the way he tests people just to break them." Jack looked at her. For the first time, really looked. "You ever seen a dam break?" he asked. She frowned. "No. You don't see it right away. Cracks show up slowly. Everyone thinks it's holding. But one day, under just the right pressure," he held out his hand, fingers slightly parted. "Everything gives." She'd stared at him. "Are you the dam I was?" he said. "Then I became the river." Lucy's voice trembled. "He's crossing lines. He's using your silence like permission." Jack stood slowly, every movement deliberate. "Then maybe it's time I spoke." They stood in silence a moment longer. Then Lucy asked. "Why not?" Jack looked toward the open gym doors, where voices still echoed over impact and instruction. "Because someone else is watching now," he said. "Someone who thinks silence is safety. And she's wrong." Lucy followed his gaze. Emma. She was standing just outside holding a folder and watching her father through the glass. Her eyes were steady, not afraid, not angry, just waiting. The gym buzzed with energy that afternoon, but it wasn't from the drills. Something else crackled in the air, unspoken, unmeasured, undeniable. Even the newest recruits could feel it, though they couldn't name it. A tension beneath the surface, like a storm that hadn't yet declared itself, but had already darkened the sky. Lieutenant Mason Briggs was in full command mode, barking orders with exaggerated volume. His smile was tight artificial. He knew eyes were on him, not with admiration anymore, but calculation. Ever since the janitor stood his ground, and the room fell silent, the balance had shifted. A pebble had been dropped into still water. The ripples were reaching far. But Mason Briggs didn't back down. Not him. Not ever. "All right, listen up," he called. "We're going to do something special today. A little demonstration for the new cadets. Something real. Something memorable. He glanced toward the far end of the gym where Jack Rourke was kneeling, adjusting the mats like he always did, as if the world beyond his square footage didn't exist. But Briggs knew better now. He walked over slowly, boots hitting the floor, with too much force. "Hey, Jack," he said loudly. "We could use your help." Jack didn't look up. Help with what Briggs turned to the watching soldiers. "With a live demonstration. I want to show them what happens when a man without training steps into a professional space." Jack stood slowly. No sudden movement, no aggression. Just calm, like the tide pulling back before the wave. "I'm not part of the curriculum," he said. Briggs leaned in. "No, but you're part of the show now. Don't worry, just a little spar. Won't take long." Jack's eyes scanned the room. Dozens of young soldiers, watching, learning, waiting for someone to tell them what strength looked like. Emma was there too, standing by the doorway. Her arms were crossed, but her eyes were open. She wasn't hiding anymore. And Lucy Carter standing at the front, lips tight, shoulders squared. She wasn't afraid for Jack. She was afraid of what he might still be holding back. Jack turned back to Briggs. "If we do this," he said quietly, "you owe them something." Briggs smirked. "Like what a lesson, not just a fight. When we're done, you'll explain why you turned this mat into a stage." Briggs laughed loud and theatrical. "Sure, whatever helps you sleep tonight." The room cleared. The recruits stepped back to form a circle. A few sat down. Phones were out, but subtly. No one wanted to miss what came next. Briggs pulled off his shirt, revealing years of muscle stacked by discipline and ego. He bounced slightly on the balls of his feet. Showman's rhythm. Jack stepped onto the mat with no ceremony, still in work boots and coveralls, sleeves rolled to the forearms. His steps were silent, his breathing steady, like he was entering a place he hadn't touched in years, but never forgot. Briggs clapped his hands once. "All right, Ghostbuster, let's see what that mop's been hiding." Jack didn't flinch. Briggs moved first. Fast, sharp, a textbook strike toward the center, mass a push, not a punch. Designed to jar, intimidate, establish dominance, he hit Jack square in the chest, and nothing happened. Jack didn't move, didn't sway, didn't blink. He stood there like a wall, a monument. And for the second time in as many days, Mason Briggs felt his certainty unravel beneath his fingertips. Gasps rippled through the room. Briggs took a step back. "That all you got?" he said. But the words landed flat, uncertain. Jack didn't answer. He just raised one brow almost politely. Briggs charged. This time it wasn't a shove, it was a sequence. A flurry of well-practiced strikes. A feint, a jab, a sweep of the leg, then a sudden attempt at a shoulder lock. Fast, brutal, efficient, Jack flowed through them. He didn't counter. He didn't strike. He moved like water past rock, evading, bending, stepping just out of reach, with the precision of someone who'd studied not just the attack, but the attacker. Briggs stumbled on his own momentum. That's when Jack spoke quietly so only those closest could hear. "Your left guard drops when you're frustrated." Briggs spun. "What? And your hips telegraph your pivot. You lead with your shoulders. Always have." Briggs stared at him, breathing hard. "You don't know me. I trained men who moved like you," Jack said. "They're not around anymore." The weight of those words didn't come from volume. It came from memory. Briggs lunged again. A desperate move. Jack didn't block. He stepped inside the strike, and gently, almost kindly, placed a single hand against Briggs's sternum. The lieutenant flew. Not from power, from leverage, from technique so refined it looked like magic. Briggs hit the mat with a thud that echoed louder than his insults ever had. Silence. Pure. Unyielding. And then Jack turned, not to gloat, not to preach, but to the young faces staring back at him wide-eyed and motionless. You want to know what strength is, he said. It's knowing you can hurt someone, and choosing not to. Lucy swallowed hard. One of the cadets dropped his phone. Emma stood taller. Jack looked down at Briggs, who lay winded and silent, then added gently, "And it's never about making someone smaller to feel bigger, especially not in front of those still learning what big even means." He walked off the mat in silence, and as he passed Emma, she looked at him, eyes full, voice steady. "That wasn't just a fight." Jack nodded. "No, it was a mirror." It was. The gym was quieter the next morning, as if the building itself hadn't yet recovered from what it had witnessed. The mat was still there, square, clean, unscarred. But something had changed. Not in the surface beneath their boots, but in the air above it. Respect had settled like dust, silent but heavy. Jack Rourke arrived early as he always did, only this time no one looked past him. A few cadets nodded. One even offered a quiet "sir" before correcting himself with a stammered, "Sorry, Mr. Rourke." Jack didn't correct him. He just mopped the floor slow and steady the same way he always had. It wasn't the tool that mattered. It was the intention. Across the gym, Lucy Cotter sat alone, notebook open, flipping through her combat psychology notes. But she wasn't reading. She was watching Jack, her pen tapping gently against the page. Eventually she stood and crossed the room. "You ever think about teaching again?" she asked, her voice soft but curious. Jack looked up unfazed. "I taught once. Cost me more than I wanted to pay." Lucy folded her arms. "That's not what I asked." He studied her eyes steady. "Why do you care?" She paused before answering. "Because half the people in this gym think strength means how loud you hit. But yesterday, you taught us something else, and I'm not sure anyone else here can." Jack went back to mopping. "You learn more from silence than from shouting. But most people aren't ready to listen." Lucy smiled slightly. "Then make them ready." Before Jack could respond, the gym door opened. Colonel Adams. He didn't announce himself. He didn't need to. He walked with the slow deliberation of someone who'd seen wars and knew the quiet after them was always louder than the noise inside. He stepped onto the mat, turned to face the assembled cadets, who had begun to form ranks without needing to be told. Jack stood aside. Mop paused mid-stroke. Adams didn't raise his voice. "What happened yesterday," he said, "wasn't just a sparring session. It was a reckoning." No one breathed. "Too many of you are training to fight, without ever asking why you fight." His eyes scanned the room, slow, deliberate. Then they landed on Briggs, who stood at the edge, arms folded, chin slightly lowered. "I've seen soldiers break bones and think they've won. I've seen men walk away from a fight with their pride intact, but their character hollowed out." Then he turned to Jack. "And I've seen men who clean our floors, teach us all what it means to stand." Jack didn't speak. Adams continued. "You're all learning how to hit. That's easy. What's harder is learning when not to. And there are only a few men in this room who can teach that." The silence was thick now, reverent. Adams stepped closer to Jack. "I'd like you to consider joining our training program, not as janitor, as mentor." Jack shook his head slowly. "I'm not that man anymore." Adams didn't flinch. "Maybe, but you're still the one they need." Lucy broke the stillness. "You told me once that silence teaches, but yesterday, you spoke, and every one of us heard." Jack turned to her, his eyes searching. "I didn't do it to inspire," she nodded. "You did it to protect. That's exactly why it matters." Jack sighed, the kind that doesn't just release breath, but ghosts. He looked down at his boots, still worn, still stained, still standing. "You think they'll follow someone who mops floors?" Adams smiled just barely. "Only if they're smart enough to understand that dirt doesn't mean weak. It means you've been close to the ground, that you've fallen and stood again. Jack stared at the mop handle in his hand. Then slowly he set it aside. A quiet murmur swept through the cadets, not of surprise but of something deeper. Respect. Briggs stepped forward, tentatively. He looked smaller today, stripped of the armor of arrogance. He cleared his throat. Jack. Mr. Rourke, I owe you an apology. Jack raised an eyebrow. You owe them one. Briggs glanced at the room, at the faces he'd once balked over, then back at Jack. I was wrong, about strength, about you. Jack didn't nod, didn't offer a handshake. He just said, then prove it. Every day. Briggs nodded. I will. And for once he meant it. As the cadets returned to their drills, something in the room shifted again, not in tension this time, but in tone. The gym felt lighter, clearer. Jack picked up his mop once more, not out of duty but by choice. He moved toward the corner where scuff marks still lingered on the old wood. He knelt, sprayed the solution, and began scrubbing slowly. Lucy walked over, crouched beside him. You know, she said most people wouldn't choose to keep mopping after all that. Jack smiled faintly. That's because most people still think the floor is beneath them. She looked at him. I think the floor remembers everyone who walks on it, she whispered. Jack didn't reply. He didn't have to. The late autumn wind rolled through the base that night, scraping across the barracks and rattling the windows like some forgotten song. Inside her room, Private Lucy Carter sat at her desk, laptop open the glow, reflecting off a half-filled journal. The file on her screen read, Case Study Combat Psychology and Humility in Leadership. But she hadn't typed in 20 minutes. She was staring at a photo she'd found earlier, an old military archive. Jack Rourke, a decade younger, standing beside a soldier with his arms slung around Jack's shoulder, both men grinning. Alive. She hovered the cursor over the name beside the man, Rodriguez Anthony J. Tony Rodriguez. The name Jack had whispered, when he thought no one was listening. Lucy closed the laptop. Some things couldn't be written in papers. Some truths deserved more than footnotes. Across base, Jack Rourke stood in the darkened gym lights, off only moonlight cutting across the floor like a memory. He stood in the center of the mat. No mop. No crowd, just the ghost of who he'd been and who he'd lost. His hands clenched and unclenched slowly, not from anger, but memory, the kind that settles in the bones and never really leaves. He dropped to his knees, laid his palm flat on the mat. I'm sorry, Tony, he whispered. I should have walked away. I should have known better. The mat didn't answer. But something in the stillness felt like permission to keep breathing. Behind him the door creaked. He turned. Emma stood there, arms wrapped around a jacket too thin for the wind outside. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes tired. You don't have to haunt this place, she said gently. Jack rose slowly. It haunts me. Emma walked forward, her boots light on the mat. Mom used to say you talked in your sleep sometimes. Not words, just names. One night I heard you say, I told him to pivot, not rush. I was 8. I thought you were dreaming about football. Jack sat down on the edge of the mat. Emma joined him. He spoke without looking at her. It was a sparring session. Training rotation before deployment. Tony was quick, always too eager. I told him to pivot, wait for the opening. But he rushed in, took a clean punch. Slipped. The back of his head hit the platform. I saw his eyes roll before his body hit the ground. Emma's voice was barely above a whisper. Was it your fault Jack didn't answer for a long time? Then, no. But it was my responsibility. She let that sit. Let it breathe. Then she said, Is that why you left? I didn't leave. Jack said. I disappeared. There's a difference. Emma turned to face him. I didn't need a ghost. I needed my dad. That one landed. He looked at her. Really looked. and saw not the little girl he'd tried to protect, but the woman who'd grown up in the quiet of his absence. "I didn't know how to be both," he said. "A soldier and a father." She nodded slowly. "Maybe it's time you stopped choosing." The next morning Jack walked into the administrative office clean-shaven in pressed civilian attire for the first time in months. Colonel Adams looked up surprised. "That's either an old uniform or a new purpose." Jack smiled faintly. "Let's call it both." He set a folded piece of paper on the colonel's desk. Adams raised a brow. "What's this?" "My formal acceptance. Mentor role. I'll work under training ops, not command. I'm not coming back as a warrior. I'm coming back as what I should have been a long time ago." Adams leaned back. "Why now?" Jack's answer came easy. "Because silence teaches. But sometimes it also hides. And my daughter deserves a man who doesn't hide anymore." Adams stood and offered his hand. "Welcome back, Ghost Wolf." Jack shook it. "Just Jack is fine." That afternoon, a new training roster went up on the bulletin board. Beside the standard rotations, one new line stood out: Advanced Combat Ethics and Close Control Mentor, Jack Rourke Seavey. Lucy was the first to see it. She smiled quietly, then turned just in time to see Briggs reading the same list. He looked pale, uncertain. "You going to sign up?" she asked. Briggs hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah. If I'm going to unlearn everything I did wrong, I might as well start from the guy who did it right." Lucy tilted her head. "Funny. I don't think he thinks he did it right." Briggs looked at her more serious than she'd ever seen him. "That's why I trust him now." That night Jack returned to the gym. He rolled out a mat in the far corner, not under the lights, but near the shadows close to where he used to mop. He didn't call for students, didn't raise his voice. He simply began to move slow drills, patient forms, not performance, not power, control, grace, presence. One by one cadets joined him, not because they were told, but because something about the way he moved made them believe that maybe strength didn't come from shouting or striking, but from stillness. Emma watched from the balcony above, hands resting on the railing. Lucy stood beside her. "You ever think a man like that could change the course of a whole generation?" Lucy asked. Emma nodded. "He changed mine, without ever raising his voice." Lucy smiled, and without ever stopping to explain, she said that the wounds that shape us most don't always bleed. The sun over Fort Ridgeline burned gold through the late afternoon haze, casting long shadows across the open field, where the cadets jogged in formation. Their chants echoed between the barracks, rhythmic and proud. But inside the training hall, another kind of rhythm had taken root, slower, quieter, deeper. Jack Rourke stood barefoot on the mat, hands relaxed at his sides, eyes closed, as he guided the students through breathing drills. Every movement was minimal, every pause deliberate. It wasn't just technique he was teaching, it was restraint. And they were learning, all of them except one. From the far edge of the room, Lieutenant Mason Briggs watched in silence, his expression unreadable. Arms crossed, jaw set. He hadn't spoken to Jack since the fall, the one that left him staring at the ceiling and his own pride in pieces. But he hadn't left either. And something about that, about staying, even when shamed, meant more to Jack than any apology ever could. Jack opened his eyes and addressed the room. "You don't win by outpunching the other guy. You win by outlasting your own anger. Because that's the fight no one teaches you how to survive." The cadets stood still, absorbing every word. One or two nodded slowly. Lucy, kneeling in the front row, scribbled in her notebook, her eyes not missing a single move. Briggs stepped forward. Jack noticed. Everyone did. "I have a request," Briggs said. Voice steady. Jack gave a slight nod. "Let's hear it." Briggs glanced around the room, then back at Jack. "I want one more round. One that isn't for show. One where I'm not trying to prove I'm right, just trying to see if I can be better. The room went still. No whispers, just breath held tight. Jack studied him. "I don't fight for pride," he said. Briggs's reply was quiet but certain. "Neither do I, not anymore." Jack held his gaze, then finally nodded. "Tomorrow. Oro 600, no audience. Just you, me, and truth." The next morning, the gym lights buzzed softly as two men faced each other on the mat. No cadets, no rank insignias, no titles. Just sweatpants, barefoot soles, and a space between them that once held animosity, now replaced with something harder to define. Briggs exhaled, loosening his stance. "I've been watching you teach," he said. "I thought it would make me feel smaller." It didn't. It made me realize I've been loud my whole life because I was afraid of being unheard. Jack circled slowly, his body relaxed, and Briggs squared his shoulders. "I don't want to fight to win today. I want to fight to listen." They began. The first few exchanges were clean controlled. Jack deflected. Briggs adjusted. There was no power play, no showmanship, just honest movement. Every strike tested reflexes. Every counter asked a question. Minutes passed. Then Briggs stepped in too hard, an old habit. Jack trapped his arm, mid-strike, pivoted, and brought him to the ground in a clean sweep. The thud wasn't harsh, just final. Briggs lay there staring at the ceiling. Again. But this time his chest rose with laughter, not humiliation. "You waited for me to make the same mistake," he said between breaths. Jack offered a hand. "No. I waited to see if you'd recognize it." Briggs took it. As he stood, he whispered, "I did." Jack smiled. "Then that's the real win." From the shadowed hallway outside the gym, Emma watched through the glass window. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop. But something about seeing her father not fight to dominate, but to elevate, stirred something in her chest. Lucy stepped beside her. "He's not who I thought he was," Emma said softly. Lucy nodded. "He's better." They stood together in silence, watching two men bow to each other, not out of ceremony but of earned respect. Then Lucy turned to Emma. "He still thinks he's just a man who used to be someone." Emma smiled. "That's because he doesn't realize yet. He's finally become someone worth becoming." Later that day, Colonel Adams called Jack into his office. The blinds were half drawn. A file sat open on the desk. "You made quite an impression," Adams said. "I wasn't trying to," Jack replied. "That's why it worked." The colonel closed the folder, tapped a pen against the desk. "There's a leadership seminar next month at the academy," he said. "They're looking for someone to speak. Not about tactics, about ethics, about consequence." Jack raised a brow. "You want me to stand in front of a room full of officers and tell them not to fight? I want you to stand in front of a room full of warriors," Adams said, "and remind them what they're fighting for." Jack looked out the window. The sky was pale. The flag danced against the wind like it had nothing to prove. "I'll think about it." "Don't think too long," Adams said with a grin. "Some of us are finally ready to listen." That evening Jack found himself back on the mat, barefoot, Emma seated at the edge with a stack of papers. "You used to hate when I asked questions," she said. Jack chuckled. "That's because you asked good ones. Too good." She held up a form. "This is an application to guest lecture at the academy. You're actually considering it." He nodded. "People need to know that real power doesn't come from how hard you hit." Emma looked at him. "Where does it come from?" He reached down and gently tapped the mat beneath his feet. "From learning what not to strike," he said. "Even when you can." The gym was nearly empty, the kind of quiet that didn't come from absence, but from respect. A weight hung in the air like incense, not heavy, not oppressive, but reverent. was the day after Jack and Briggs sparred for the second time, and though no announcements had been made, everyone knew. Something had shifted. Jack Rourke was no longer the janitor. He was something more. But Jack, he hadn't changed. He still showed up early, still moved through the space like a man who honored the floor he walked on, still mopped the edges of the mat as though it deserved to be clean for whoever would fall on it next. But when he moved, now cadets paused their drills. Recruits watched more than they copied. They didn't ask for stories. They didn't dare. Because what they saw wasn't a man boasting of victories. It was a man who'd survived himself. That morning, Lucy approached Jack during his solo warm-up. "Colonel Adams said you turned down the academy lecture," she said, arms folded. Jack exhaled slowly. Not yet. Just paused. Lucy sat on the bench beside him. Why the hesitation? Jack looked at the mad eyes, distant. Because I'm not sure if people want to hear from a man who spent 10 years hiding behind bleach and silence. She tilted her head. Or maybe you're scared they'll actually listen. He glanced sideways, a small smile forming. You ever think you're too sharp for your rank? I'm not the one who won wars without raising my voice. She shot back. He chuckled, then sobered. Truth is, he said, I flinched once. Lucy looked at him. In combat, no, Jack replied. In life, later that afternoon, Emma sat outside the rec hall waiting for Jack. The wind rustled the pages of her notebook filled with college essays she'd been rewriting for weeks, none of which felt honest enough. Jack approached with 2 mugs of cocoa no sugar, just like she liked. She looked up surprised. This is new. Jack handed her a mug, then sat beside her. You've been thinking. Too much. He sipped, waited. Emma hesitated, then asked, Why didn't you tell me who you were? Jack stared out toward the parade ground. I wasn't hiding from you, Emma. I was protecting the part of me I was scared you might believe was all of me. She nodded. I get that. But I think I needed to know the whole picture, not just the part that cleaned floors and fixed sinks. He turned toward her. I didn't want you to grow up thinking strength was the same thing as dominance. Emma's voice softened. But I also didn't need to grow up thinking silence was safety. That landed. Hard. Jack nodded slowly. You're right. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded paper. What's that? My essay for state. Title, The Man Who Didn't Flinch. Jack raised an eyebrow. She smiled. It's about you. He took the paper hands suddenly, more unsure than they'd ever been in a fight. He scanned the first few lines. Some heroes walk away from explosions. Others walk away from applause. My father walked away from both. But the bravest thing he ever did was walk back. Jack's eyes didn't blink for a long time. When they finally did, they were wet. Emma reached over, rested her head on his shoulder. You didn't flinch when the world pushed you, she whispered. You only paused long enough to remember who you really were. Jack looked at the paper again. He didn't see words. He saw healing. That night, the cadets gathered in the gym for what they assumed would be a standard evening review. But when they arrived, the mat was lit differently, warmer lower lights. A chair stood at the center. Colonel Adams stepped forward. We asked Jack Rourke to speak tonight, not because he's decorated, not because he's undefeated, but because he's done something most of us never do. He paused. He chose to return. Jack stepped onto the mat. No uniform, no mop, just a man with eyes that had seen too much and still decided to care. He sat, looked around the room, then began. I was a ghost long before anyone called me that, he said. I disappeared from the battlefield, but more than that, I disappeared from myself. Silence. People think flinching is weakness, that if you back away, you lose your place. But I'm here to tell you flinching can be the very thing that saves your life. The cadets leaned in. Jack continued, voice softer but stronger. I didn't flinch in war, but I flinched when I held my daughter for the first time. I flinched when I watched a friend die because I lost control. And I flinched the first time a young soldier asked me without words to show him what kind of man he should become. He looked around the room. I'm not here to teach you how to fight. That's the easy part. A beat. I'm here to teach you how to stop, when stopping is the bravest choice in the room. Lucy blinked back something she didn't let fall. Briggs stood near the back, spine, straight face, unreadable, but his hands were clasped together. Listening. Jack finished. You will be praised for being loud. You will be rewarded for aggression. But the world needs warriors who know that courage lives in stillness, and that not flinching starts in the soul. He stood. Nods rippled across the room, not out of obligation, but because something ancient had stirred inside each one of them. Jack stepped down. Emma met him at the side, her eyes glowing, ready for that academy lecture she teased. Jack smiled, faint but real. I just gave it. The following morning arrived draped in a grey mist that clung low to the ground, turning the training yard into something half-remembered, like a dream fading at sunrise. Jack Rourke walked across the gravel path, his boots crunching against the silence. Every step felt heavier, not from fatigue, but from memory. That night's speech had stirred more than just the cadets. It had stirred him. For years he'd lived in the quiet by choice, but now the quiet was lifting, and something long buried was beginning to breathe. He passed the old records office, its windows still cracked from years of disuse, and paused at a door few people noticed. Faded, rusted, forgotten, just like the man he used to be. He opened it. Inside, under layers of dust and time, sat his file. Rourke Jackham. Combat Operations to Moaizu. Declassified. Didn't flip through it. He didn't need to. He remembered every page by heart. Fallujah, Marja, Songan. Words like ghosts, a folder within the folder smaller, labeled only Operation Cinderhook. He sat on the cold metal chair and opened it. There she was. Sergeant Ainsley Grant. Her eyes were sharp in the photo, even in grainy black and white. She'd been the youngest in their unit, the brightest, and the one who never came home. Jack pressed his palm against the page as if he could feel her heartbeat through time. That afternoon, Lucy found Jack by the motor pool, wiping grease from his hands with an old towel. I heard you went to records. Jack didn't look up. That place still smells like sweat and ghosts. She smiled faintly. You didn't flinch, though. I never flinch for the dead, he said softly. Only the living. Lucy leaned against the truck beside him. You gonna tell Emma? Jack finally looked at her. She doesn't need to carry that weight. She already carries your silence. Which do you think is heavier? That landed. Hard. Lucy tapped the hood. You always said truth doesn't make a man weak. I said that. She nodded. You did. Just before teaching me how to disarm a knife blindfolded. He chuckled. Bad day for you. Good lesson for me. Lucy stepped forward. Jack. The girl in that file. Ainsley Grant. What happened to her wasn't your fault. Jack's eyes turned distant. I left her. I froze. Lucy's voice dropped. What did she say before Jack didn't blink? She said, tell them I wasn't afraid. Tell them I died standing. He swallowed. But I never told anyone. I didn't have the right. Lucy shook her head. No. You have to tell them, because no one else can. That evening Jack sat on the edge of his daughter's bunk. Emma was reading silently, but her eyes kept flicking to him. You okay? She asked. Jack didn't answer right away. He looked at her like a man trying to remember something he forgot he once needed. I've kept something from you, he said. Not out of shame. Out of fear that if you saw it, you'd look at me differently. Emma closed her book. Dad, the only thing I've ever been afraid of is not knowing who you really are. Jack nodded slowly. It was a woman, a soldier, young, brilliant mouth full of fire. She saved 6 lives that day and died before she was 24. I was supposed to cover her. I didn't. I hesitated. Emma reached for his hand. What happened after I left, he said simply. Left the Corps. Left myself. Started fixing things no one would remember because it was easier than trying to fix what I couldn't forget. Emma held his gaze. But you didn't forget her. You honored her, every quiet moment, every lesson you taught. It was her, wasn't it? Jack's jaw tightened. She's the reason I taught you to stand with your feet planted and your eyes open, he whispered. She's the reason I couldn't let myself raise my voice, because I'd already failed someone who never raised hers. Emma didn't cry. She just wrapped her arms around him and said, maybe the reason I believe in you is because she believed in you first. 2 days later, Colonel Adams called a base-wide assembly. Not mandatory, but no one missed it. The auditorium filled with cadets, officers, even a few veterans who hadn't been seen in months. Jack stood backstage with Emma and Lucy, dressed in the same plain clothes he always wore, creased khakis, a black button-down sleeves rolled just enough to show the edges of his old service tattoo. Adams took the mic first. Some stories don't come with medals, he said. Some come with silence. But today we honor a man who carried a name most forgot, even though he never forgot ours. He turned. Jack Rourke, combat specialist, janitor, father, ghost. Come speak your name. Jack stepped forward. The room was so still, he could hear the hum of the lights above. He held no paper, no script, only truth. My name is Jack Rourke, he began. For a long time I believed I didn't deserve to say it out loud. He paused. I flinched once. And someone else paid the price. He told them about Ainsley, about the moment, about the years that followed. Not as confession, as witness. And when he finished, no one applauded. They stood. Every single soul in the room rose not for spectacle, but for reverence. And in the back row, Emma clutched Lucy's arm, whispering, he finally said her name. Lucy whispered back, and his own. The base had never felt so quiet, and yet never so alive. In the days following Jack's speech, a shift took place, not in policy but in people. The cadets trained harder, but with more thought, more humility, more heart. Conversations changed. So did posture. Even the air in the gym felt different, like a weight had lifted and settled in equal measure. It wasn't about strength anymore. It was about why they were strong. Colonel Adams stood near the observation deck, arms folded, as he looked down at the main floor. Lucy Carter joined him, her expression soft, contemplative. You ever seen anything like it? She asked. Adams shook his head. In all my years, I've seen soldiers rise through rank and war. But I've never seen a room stand silent for a janitor who carried more honor than medals. Lucy nodded, because he didn't ask to lead. He just refused to leave. Down below, Jack stood on the mat again, not to fight, not to teach, but simply to be present. He was watching Emma spar with Briggs under Lucy's guidance. The 2 cadets circled one another, their movements sharp-focused. This time, there was no showmanship, no arrogance, just discipline. Briggs lunged. Emma deflected. A soft shuffle of feet, a clean strike. Jack smiled just a little. It wasn't pride in victory. It was pride in clarity. Lucy approached. She's good, Jack said, not taking his eyes off Emma. She's yours, Lucy replied. And she knows it now. He looked at her, the words hovering on his lips. I always thought I was protecting her by hiding the pain. Lucy folded her arms. And she was always protecting you. by pretending not to notice. Jack chuckled. Guess we both failed at that. No, she said, shaking her head. You both loved each other the best way you knew how. That's never failure. They stood in silence for a moment, the rhythm of training echoing around them. Then Colonel Adams stepped forward. Mr. Rourke, he called. Jack turned instinctively, standing straighter. There's a new group of recruits arriving next month, Adams said. They'll need someone who understands more than strategy. They'll need someone who understands soul. Jack's brow furrowed. You want me to teach, I want you to lead. Officially. As part of our mentorship program. Not just cleaning the building. Cleaning what built it. Jack paused, then said quietly, I'll do it. Under one condition. Adams raised an eyebrow. Name it. I want the mentorship program to be named after her, Jack said. After Ainsley. The colonel was silent for a beat, then nodded. The Sergeant Ainsley Grant Leadership Initiative. Done. Jack nodded once short, quiet, powerful. Later that evening, Emma and Jack sat by the old wood bench near the back of the barracks. The sun was melting into the horizon, turning the sky a dusky gold. Emma leaned her head on Jack's shoulder, her combat boots kicked off beside her. You really gonna do it? She asked. Already did, Jack replied. You scared, he considered, not of teaching. I'm scared of forgetting what it felt like to be silent. Emma turned to him. Then don't forget. Just use it. Turn it into something louder than shouting. He smiled. You sound like your mother. Emma beamed. She'd say the same about you. They sat in quiet for a moment longer. Then Emma asked, Do you think I'm strong enough? Jack didn't answer immediately. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small cloth pouch. Inside he unfolded an old tattered patch, faded, but still visible the insignia of his former unit. He placed it in her hand. You don't need this to prove it, he said. But when you wear it, know this, a warrior isn't the one who wins the loudest fight. A warrior is the one who chooses to stand when no one's clapping. Emma blinked, tears shimmering in her eyes. She pressed the patch to her chest. I'll stand, Dad. I know, Jack whispered. You already are. The next morning, the first sign of change arrived in the form of a brass plaque affixed outside the newly reformed training wing, Sergeant Ainsley Grant. Leadership Hall. Honor is what you do when no one remembers your name. Cadets stopped and read it. Some saluted. Others simply laid a hand gently on the wall before walking in. Inside, Jack stood before the next generation of recruits. He didn't carry a whistle. He didn't shout. He simply said, My name is Jack Rourke. I used to think silence was strength. But silence is only strength when it follows courage. Here we don't train warriors who fight for glory. We train warriors who fight because they remember. He looked out across the room, faces young, uncertain, eager. Remember what Sir One asked? Jack's voice didn't rise. He just smiled and replied, Why you stand. The ceremony wasn't meant to be grand, just a gathering, a quiet one. The kind you remember not for speeches, but for how your heart feels, long after everyone's gone home. A soft breeze rustled the flag above the courtyard at Fort Ridgeline. The sun was dipping low, casting golden ribbons across the field. Folding chairs were set in neat rows. A small podium stood beneath an oak tree. Its roots were old, like they had heard stories before. Jack stood at the back, dressed in a plain charcoal suit. His calloused hands were clasped behind him, his long blonde hair tied neatly at the nape. He didn't fidget. He simply watched. Beside him, Emma adjusted her ribboned uniform. Her promotion was official now. Second lieutenant. She wore it without show. Her posture was sharper, her eyes steadier, but her heart, that remained wide open. Lucy Carter stepped to the podium. No microphone. She didn't need one. her voice carried with the kind of strength that came not from command, but from conviction. Today she began, we dedicate this space not just to a name, but to a legacy. She gestured to the polished bronze plaque behind her. The raw call of quiet valor, sometimes the loudest act of courage, is standing still. Murmurs filled the crowd. Lucy continued, "This hall isn't for the decorated, it's not for the fearless. It's for those who kept showing up even when they had no applause, no rank, and no reason to keep going except one, because someone else might need them." She turned toward Jack, and one of them stood among us for years, sweeping our floors, watching our failures, silently reminding us every day of what it truly means to serve. Jack didn't move. He couldn't. His throat felt tight, his vision blurry. But not from grief, from the overwhelming weight of being seen. Lucy stepped aside, nodding toward Emma. She took the stage, slowly holding a single item in her hands, a folded flag that had once covered her mother's coffin. She turned to the crowd, then to Jack. "When I was a kid," she said, voice wavering just slightly, "my dad never told me stories about war. He never bragged about medals. He told me how to scrub a floor properly, how to sit with someone who's grieving, how to listen." She held up the flag. "This is what he gave me. Not just a name, but a way to live." She stepped down. Jack didn't need prompting. He moved forward, slow, deliberate, his boots making soft echoes on the concrete. He stopped at the podium, looked out at the crowd. Soldiers, old and young, parents, cadets, Lucy, Emma, Colonel Adams. No one spoke. Jack cleared his throat. Then, after a pause, he began. "I never meant to be seen. And maybe that's why I was." The wind stirred gently through the leaves. I spent a long time thinking silence was a place to hide. But it's not. Silence is where truth waits. And when you're ready, it speaks. He looked at Emma. "She taught me that sometimes the best way to fight for someone is to show them they're worth fighting for." He looked at Lucy. "She reminded me that leadership isn't volume, it's presence." And then he looked to the whole crowd. "So if you're here wondering if you matter, if what you do behind closed doors or in quiet corners makes any difference, let me say this: it does. You do. Don't wait for permission to carry meaning. Just carry it." A hush fell, but not the kind of hush that asks for more, the kind that settles, that lands, that stays. Later that evening, after the crowd had gone, Jack sat on the old bench near the edge of the field. Emma joined him barefoot, now heels slung over her shoulder. They sat in silence, side by side. She nudged his arm. "You ever gonna stop being humble?" Jack smiled. "Maybe when I stop having things to learn." Emma chuckled. "So never, huh?" He shrugged. Not a bad way to live. They watched the horizon. Then Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out a small cloth. Inside 2 patches, now his and Emma's, folded together. He handed them to her. "Keep these," he said. "But don't wear them to show you're brave." Emma looked at him. "Then what for?" "To remember where your strength really lives." She held the cloth to her chest. And as the sky deepened into dusk, and the base lights flickered one by one, father and daughter sat there, side by side. No medals, no spotlight, just presence. And sometimes that's all a warrior needs. Where are you watching from? We'd love to know. Drop a comment and tell us where in the world you're tuning in. It warms our hearts to see how far these stories travel. If this story touched your heart, consider subscribing to Soul Moment Story. We share real human stories that remind us all of what truly matters, kindness, love, and the quiet strength we carry inside. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Every view, every comment, every share keeps these moments alive, and helps us keep telling stories that heal and inspire. From our heart to yours, thank you.